Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special edition of the LeanTossup College Football Podcast. Today, it is all well, not for today. We're recording this one for this is a special episode. We're going to talk about USC, the USC Trojans. Obviously, it's a very near and dear team to my co-hosts. To my co-host's heart, Buck Metrics. He that's his team, and the thing of it is, I mean, this is a really interesting team this year. This is probably one of I literally can't think of any other team that has by far a more interesting storyline. I mean, this team was horrific. USC specifically was horrific last season, and now they stole Lincoln Riley from Oklahoma. They stole Oklahoma's quarterback. They also stole some other stuff from Oklahoma as well, and they got Pittsburgh's best wide receiver. So they have all this stuff, and the question is, how far can they go? I mean, the Pac 12 is generally not referred to as a particularly strong conference. They're generally, even last year, like they were still among one of the more talented teams in that conference despite their records. The question is, how far can a really good coach and a really good quarterback and some other good pieces, how far can it get you in 1 year? And the thing of it is, USC is considered one of the blue chip teams in college football. It's definitely one of the most well known names, associated with some of the best players ever to come out of college football going into the NFL. And they have had a lot of down years since Pete Carroll. And a lot of people want to see a good USC team, specifically with them coming into the Big Ten in 2 years. Basically, we want a good USC team. You want to watch a late night USC versus Ohio State game. You want that to be a good game. You don't want Ohio State to win that game by 30 points. You want someone to take on the Ohio States and the Alabamas and the Georgias of the world, and hopefully that team isn't from the south of the Mason-Dixon line. You want other good competitive teams. So yeah, so I'm gonna hand it off to my friend here, Buck Metrics. He's gonna talk about this. So, all right. So how are you doing tonight, Buck?
I'm very good, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yes, I'm sure you're happy to talk about USC. So, all right. So let's obviously the most important thing to any team is the offense, right? Obviously, this is Lincoln Riley's specialty. This is probably functionally the reason why he was hired as USC's head coach. The offenses at Oklahoma he's run over the years been their calling card, right? And they've had a lot of success on offense, and they've actually had a lot of quarterbacks drafted into the NFL. Go ahead. What do you think about how this offense is shaping up this year?
Yeah, last year I had them in my offensive ratings as only a plus 1.8, which was just 53rd in all of FBS. Not surprising if you saw the team. Actually, might be surprising that they were that high. Although they did have Drake London for most of last season, or a good chunk of it. So, um, I think they're going to improve substantially, and I don't think that's any secret. Just by how much is really going to be interesting here. I did some research going back through my metrics. Lincoln Riley, before he got to Oklahoma, the 3 seasons before he got there, their QB plus, and just a reminder, QB plus of 100 is average for all of FBS. So the 3 seasons before they hired Riley, QB plus at Oklahoma was 106 and 89 and 81. Then they hire Lincoln Riley as offensive coordinator, and the next 5 seasons, the QB pluses are 151, 192, 208, 208 again, and 198. Um, those numbers are just ridiculous. So my metrics go back to 2012 for QB plus. So there are 1,000 qualifiers over that 10-year span, 10-season span. Of the 11 best, the top 1.1% of all those seasons, basically Riley has 4 of the 11. Baker Mayfield twice, Kyler Murray, and Jalen Hurts. That's insane. He basically has, what is that, 36% of the top 1% just in one coach, and he's been there for not even that entire time. So clearly, Riley is going to make a difference right away. I think there were some pieces that were left for him. And then he obviously, we'll get to a little bit later, has brought in some very key pieces as well. The other coach I want to talk about is Josh Henson, the offensive line coach. He was at Oklahoma State for a few years, and then more recently as Texas A&M. And the thing that really sticks out to me about Josh Henson is last year, Texas A&M had Haynes King as their starting quarterback. He played the full game in the opener, and then in the second game, he was hurt pretty early against Colorado. And they had Zach Calzada for the rest of the season, who just was horrible all season. They had a really offensive young or very young offensive line too. So really, every defense they faced knew that Texas A&M had to run the ball because they had just a horrible quarterback that they couldn't rely on to do anything. And they had a young offensive line. They had a great running back, and actually, he coached this team up to be have the best yards per rush in the entire SEC West, which says a lot. So I'm very, very hopeful about what he'll bring to the offense as well. So as far as the actual players at quarterback, you've got Caleb Williams. I have him last year with a QB plus of 143, which is actually kind of low by Lincoln Riley standards, although he's really inherited quarterbacks since he's been their offensive coordinator. So Williams was the second after Spencer Rattler that he's had to develop from the start. His 143 QB plus for Williams places him very much at the top of the Pac-12. Second place was Dorian Thompson-Robinson at UCLA, who was about 20 points behind that. And also keep in mind that I think it's fair to say Big 12 defenses are tougher than Pac-12 defenses. And his Williams backup is Miller Moss, who was a 4-star coming out of high school and got most offers from most of the SEC. So I think they're pretty set at quarterback, although it's really, really thin after that. Don't think quarterback's going to be a problem at any stretch. It's just a matter of just how high the ceiling is for those two. At running back, it's interesting. There's been just a real overhaul of the position. Travis Dye comes in from Oregon, which is nice in that he literally has championship experience. He knows what it takes he's seen what it takes to win the conference. For those who have been around a little bit, he reminds me a lot of Justin Davis in that he doesn't really scare you per se. He will get every yard that's there, and he'll do a lot of the dirty work to set it up for the guys that are a little speedier. I'm actually really interested to see what Austin Jones does. He comes from Stanford, and we did our last podcast. We did the Pac-12, and I mentioned a crazy stat that basically, for the last 3 years, basically since Tavita Pritchard came on to Stanford as the offensive coordinator, they went from rushing from about 200 yards a game to 100. So the running game just took a complete step backwards. And yet, in his freshman season, he ran for 5 yards a carry. So I think if he's in a better situation, which he is now, he could really be one of these guys that surprises. Then they have a very highly rated true freshman coming in, Rayleigh Brown. Doing some research, it was interesting. Rayleigh Brown, I guess, he's kind of just maybe not necessarily a natural running back. There's been a question about where he'll line up. And it's interesting because looking back, Riley does not throw much at all to his running back. So it's going to be interesting. Brown is kind of a short guy, and it's going to be interesting to see where he lines up, how they use him. But he's supposedly already impressing the defense a lot. Very tough guy to tackle and very, very quick. So wild card this year. Very talented. I'm going to be interested to see just how they use him and how they get him the ball. At receiver, you've got basically last year's Biletnikoff Award winner Jordan Addison. I have a metric that I use, yards above replacement, which basically says if you've got, say that any stiff replacement level receiver can run a 5-yard pattern and catch it, we would consider 5 yards to be a replacement level yards per reception. So we take the cumulative yards less that baseline of 5 yards per reception and say what cumulatively over the whole season, how many yards did this receiver add? So he was fifth in all of FBS last season, which is interesting considering that we talked about Pitt in a prior podcast, and Pitt's offense as a whole only rated, I think, was below a 2, so which is really not that great. But Addison just totally stood out in that. The only person that returns in the nation that has a better metric, better measure in this metric is actually Jackson Smith and Jigba from Ohio State. And I'm sure everybody remembers what he did in the Rose Bowl, which was exceptional, but not entirely surprising. Addison actually pushes Gary Bryant down the depth chart. Bryant was probably their best receiver last year. And the thing is that he makes this, he's a real game changer because he is the only proven number one wide receiver. Before he came in, you had a bunch of guys that really might have been able to be a number one, but were more kind of a complimentary, not really able to just, manage everything themselves and be like the main focus of a dominant attack. He just takes the offense to a totally new dimension. Um, you know, next new face coming in is Mario Williams. He was a five-star recruit. He was a true freshman last year. His numbers weren't that great. So I think he still has to prove it. I'm looking at him just kind of as like an incoming, really highly touted freshman. Not a sure thing, but with a bright future. And I think that in 2023, he'll probably be the leader in the wide receiver room. Two guys that are being overlooked that I think could really turn into something. I'm going to put them together. Are Brendan Rice coming from Colorado and Terrell Bynum from Washington? They were both four-star recruits coming out of high school. They were both stuck in just truly awful offenses last year. Brendan Rice's quarterback had a QB plus of 69, which is really, really abysmal. And Bynum's QB at Washington was just a little bit better, a QB plus of 72. I think it's worth noting, I think both offensive coordinators were let go after last season. So you've got these guys that were, you know, they're talented. They're both highly recruited. Each of them actually led their team in yards per reception. So I think that they were probably the most explosive guys on each of their offenses. And to have them come in is really just like kind of, second and third or even, lesser on the chart receivers really just speaks to just how difficult this passing game is going to be to defend. Then you've got just the top three wide receivers that come back from last year's group. Gary Bryant, I mentioned, he was probably the best coming in. Taj Washington actually had a few more yards. Didn't really seem to get on track though, and didn't really score much. But I think they have really the speed to excel in this offense. I'm kind of wait and see on the other one, Kyle Ford. Kyle Ford, if you look at him, if you're my age, anybody remembers David Boston from Ohio State? Guy that weighed like 250 pounds as a wide receiver. Kyle Ford basically looks like the next David Boston. I'm not sure how he fits in. Now, tight end has actually had some depth problems. It wouldn't surprise me to see them just use him inside, maybe in a. And I'm not an X's and O's guys, but I'm thinking if they just maybe go without a tight end, but line up Ford inside, near the line. So overall, I'm thinking the passing game will be, extremely explosive, very hard to defend. The running game won't really lead it. Just you don't have a dominant running back, and I don't think the offensive line is really that physical to do it. But I think it'll do enough just to be enough of a change of pace to really just let the passing game just be explosive.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things is going to be, and the big story is going to be how good is this USC offense going to be? And to be honest, last year it wasn't like the worst. It actually was able to put up points at times. But the question is, how big of a leap is it going to be getting Caleb Williams and Jordan Addison and all these pieces, and also, you have to keep Travis Dye in there, he was actually very good with Oregon last year too. So my kind of question is though, and this kind of will tie into, I guess, the next part. Obviously, we talk about the defense. Is that Oklahoma has definitely been one of the best teams in the Big 12 for several years, right? And you may actually mention it very importantly too. They've had some of the best quarterbacks, right? I mean, you've got Baker Mayfield, who is an NFL starting quarter, was an NFL starting quarterback, is now. He's going to be starting with the Panthers in week one against his old team, the team that drafted him first overall, the Browns. You have Kyler Murray, again, another first overall pick with the Arizona Cardinals. He signed a deal in the offseason, I believe, making him. I can't remember if he is now the highest paid quarterback in the league or one of the most. I can't remember exactly, but definitely a very highly paid quarterback, very good prospect, one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Also, Jalen Hurts, another. He was not first round; he was a second round pick, and he is potentially. Um, Philadelphia's quarterback of the future, and set to have it. He basically beat out Carson Wentz, and now is potentially going to secure a starting job in Philadelphia this year if he has a good season. But the problem is whenever you look at Oklahoma, and this was worse before Lincoln Riley came to Oklahoma. Before Lincoln Riley came to Oklahoma, this team was always a team that had insanely high expectations and never could live up to them. They'd always lose a ton of random games. Lincoln Riley has definitely been able to master the art of keeping expectations, meeting expectations. But there's always been a couple of games through the year. So, like for example, last year, close call against Nebraska, only beat Nebraska by a touchdown. Only beat West Virginia by 3. Now, to be fair, that was with Spencer Rattler, and then Spencer Rattler's he basically lost the job against Texas. But then you say, okay, you want to blame that on Rattler last year, that's fine. But Caleb Williams is a passer. To be fair, it was his first year as a starting quarterback, so there will hopefully be some evolution here. But lost to Baylor, 27-14. Baylor's defense was able to stifle the offense. Oklahoma State's defense was able to stop them as well. Iowa State was also able to. They only beat Iowa State by 7, lost to Oklahoma State by 4. So it seems like they lost a lot of steam down the stretch there. Now they were able to beat Oregon. They put up a lot of points against this Oregon team, which again that's kind of the more traditional defense that they're going to see a lot more this year. Um, but my concern is that like do you think like are you concerned about the kind of eventual Oklahoma trap game with them this year? Like there always was seemed to be a game, especially late season, it'd be against like a Baylor or an Iowa State. Going back to 2020, well, actually they lost against Kansas State and Iowa State early in the season, so they didn't really have a trap game late season. But 2019 again, they barely beat Baylor in the actually that was the championship game. But again, they did lose to Kansas State. They lost to Kansas State by 7 in 2019 as well. There always seems to be a late trap game, and even then, even in 2019, only beat TCU by 4 points here. What like are you concerned about this? Like, are you concerned about an eventual trap game for them this year, or do you think that maybe as Lincoln Riley is still a relatively new face as a head coach. Caleb Williams is going to develop as a passer. Are you less worried about a kind of meltdown in a late season game this year?
Less concerned than well, compared to the prior coach. It was so bad that there were no trap games. It was almost a surprise when we won. Um, I would frame it this way. I think that just the change in venue, every program has its own personality. I don't know if I'd characterize it as specifically late season, although when we go through the schedule, there's one that's really got me kind of irrationally concerned, and it just kind of smells like Matt Campbell has just kind of moved to the Pacific time zone and is lurking for us later in the season. I can see it. I can definitely say as high, but excuse me, as high as I am on this higher, um, he's definitely not at that level of a elite coach that is immune to a stupid loss. He just, you've got to be just at the tippity tippity top. I mean, you're talking just like the top two or three guys that at that point are, immune. Top four, I guess. I don't really remember Ryan Day having a dumb loss. But you're talking about that level. He's not there. I think he's in that next tier. And, you know, who can't you say that about? It's fine. If that's one of the biggest problems we've had, my gosh, we've erased a ton of problems from basically 11 months ago.
No, of course, right? And that's a very important point, right? I mean, again, if you're suddenly now looking at 11-1 USC going into the conference championship game, that's a lot better than 3-7 USC, right? Or something like that, right? So, but one concerning aspect of that though is, and again, this is only a relatively short-term issue, is that if you're looking at a USC that only had like if they lose a random game down the stretch, then that's their shot at the college football playoff gone, right? And that's the thing, right? You lose a random game to like a team in the Big 12, or if you're in the SEC and you lose a random game, you're probably okay. But if you lose a random game in the Pac-12, I don't know if you're going to be able to survive that and make it to the playoff. That's the problem. But like,
Correct.
do you think is that a reasonable goal for you? Do you think that that's a reasonable goal for you this season then, like like if you made the playoffs, obviously you'd be happy, but like if you didn't come close to the playoffs, would you still think the season is a success? Like if you like 3 loss USC. you're like, okay, that's growing pains, right? Like, where's the line for you between successful, not successful season?
I wouldn't look so much at one loss. I think to me, because you've got Notre Dame, which is going to be tough, and then I think that Fresno State's going to be a tough game as well. So and we'll get into more detail on that a little bit later. But to me, a reasonable expectation is getting to the Pac-12 title game. That would show considerable improvement. It's if you're realistic, it's kind of a stretch goal because you're definitely are passing a lot of teams, especially Oregon, who a lot of people are expecting to be in the conference title game. So I think that's realistic. Is it realistic to say you have to beat Utah at least once next season? I don't know if that's realistic. We can all dream, and having been here for 30 years, USC fans are often not the most realistic. But I think getting to the conference title game is a very realistic expectation for a really good season.
Yeah. So, all right. So then, the other half of the coin obviously is on defense. So now this has been a glaring kind of issue area for Oklahoma, and I'm obviously going to use Oklahoma as the benchmark for all this stuff rather than USC because I don't really feel like it's relevant to compare. Like, obviously, this USC team is going to be completely different than the last team. I feel like it's a lot more beneficial to compare this USC team to what Oklahoma's been able to do in the past. And defense has always been a glaring issue for this team, right? I mean, we all remember that 2020 season. I think the 2020 playoffs when they lost to LSU. Now, to be fair, though, probably one of the best college football teams of all time with that LSU team. They had what two of the two of the best wide receivers in the league, plus one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL right now on that team.
Hmm.
Like that team was insane. I'd actually love to see that team go up against Georgia. That'd be so fun. Oh man, that'd
Yeah.
be so great. But no, like do you like that team? Yes, that team torched them in the semifinals, and that was with Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts does have some limitations as a pocket passer. He wasn't able to do it that year for them. But my concern is like again that's in the Big 12 now. Again, Big 12 definitely not known for defense, very good defenses. Pac-12 also not particularly known for good defenses. We're a long way away from a really strong West Coast defense here. The West Coast is known for a lot of high scoring games as well. So, do you think defense is going to be a strength or weakness for them relative to the other teams in the Pac-12 this year?
Wow, you did an awesome question with that little framing at the end compared to other Pac-12 teams. I think it'll probably improve to okay. They're coming from a bad spot. I had their defensive rating as a minus 3.3, which was 96th in all of FBS. Um, Alex Grinch is an interesting coach. I think clearly he gets along well with Riley. That's why he was one of the first guys that he brought over. Um, digging into his history, going by my defensive ratings. So the season before, if for those who don't know, Grinch actually got his first defensive coordinator job at Washington State under Mike Leach. So the season before he came on, Washington State's defense was a negative 7.8 rating. Then Grinch is hired. He improves them to a negative 2.3. Then he has in back-to-back seasons a plus 5.8 and a plus 5.7. So, definite improvement and sustained it for more than one season, which is really, really impressive. Um, After that, actually, Urban Meyer hired him to be co-defensive coordinator under Greg Schiano. Something just went wrong there because that defense took a step back. I don't know who to blame or what to blame. I know that Schiano was the DC and he was the co-DC. I think they just didn't get along because he was after one season he was in Norman, Oklahoma. And how did he do there? So the season before he went to Oklahoma, Oklahoma's defensive rating was a negative 3.0. Right away, he improves them to a positive 3.6 and then sustains it again as a positive 3.3. Then last season, I think there was something just kind of weird off with that whole program last season. You mentioned, the quarterback play wasn't quite as good. On defense too, they took a step back to just a plus zero point zero 0.02, although that was way better than what USC had last season. So I'm expecting just from the defensive scheme will be sounder. I think that the position coaches will be a lot better as well. And we'll get into the personnel in a moment. The one coach I'm most interested in is Sean Nua. He was at Michigan for the last 3 years. So he really developed both the Aiden Hutchison and David Ajabo, who I don't know. I'm not going to say that they were the best pair of defensive ends because they didn't play at Georgia, but they're pretty much in the conversation. And it's not, I guess, I would put it this way. I can't say that it was really the defensive coordinator that really had all that going on because the defensive coordinator was his first year at Michigan. So Nua really developed these guys. So I'm very, very hopeful that he can really, instill some toughness. The Big Ten obviously is a much more physical league than the Pac-12, and it's nice to have, a guy from that conference coming in. I think also, just as a side note, if you look at Michigan, I think one of the village industries we're going to see is good position coaches and coordinators that have just had it with Jim Harbaugh and are going to be able to kind of sign on anywhere. You saw that with their offensive coordinator and their defensive coordinator and Sean Nua all leaving and landing in really nice spots. So that's the coaches. I think the coaches are going to be just a huge upgrade. The personnel is interesting. Of the 22 two deep on defense, nine of the guys are actually transfers in just this season. And yes, last time we talked about UCLA and how many transfers they had coming in. Thing is, these guys are from really, really good programs for the most part, and just legitimate, Pac-12 caliber programs. We've got a guy from TCU, a guy from Wyoming who actually in 2019 was a freshman All-American. We have a defensive end from Auburn. We have a linebacker from Alabama who was a freshman All-American in 2019. We have a really, really good linebacker from Arizona who was a freshman All-American last season. We have Colorado, probably their best defensive player that was going to return. He's a cornerback, and he was all Pac-12 third team last season. There's a DB from Oklahoma, a DB from Ohio State, pardon me. And what I really love is they got a cornerback from Washington who was a four-star coming out of high school. I really, really like that because if there's one thing that Jimmy Lake did really, really well, it's develop just high-end defensive backs, and he's put a lot of guys into the league. So I think there's really a plug-and-play element there. So, and if you saw the defense, you know that we basically needed just an absolute transfusion of talent. And this is about as reasonable as you could expect. So my concerns, the biggest problem with this defense last season was the defensive line. If you watched it, they could not stop anybody. Now, Deshaun Nua help, yeah, quite a bit. But the thing that's really concerning is the defensive end, the defensive tackle, and the nose tackle that are slated to start so far. They all started on the 2021 season. So I'm kind of wondering, what does that say about the transfers that we brought in? Maybe it means that the guys that we had just weren't coached well. I'm a little skeptical of that. I'm just wondering, what does this say about the linemen that we brought in? We did bring a lot. Rush end is an area of concern. The top two rush ends are basically have not been healthy for most of camp so far. Corey Foreman, if anybody has followed him, basically his name is synonymous with injured. And then Romello Height from Auburn has been slow coming back this summer. So the front four is really going to be an area of concern. Also there's a definite upgrade in talent, but it seems a little grindy or workmanlike. I'm not sure about the really top end talent. I don't see any All-American candidates on this defense. Now, maybe this is like the Washington State defense that Alex Grinch had, which was, kind of workmanlike as well in terms of what he inherited. So maybe it works, but basically I think there's a definite ceiling on what this group can do this year. And then you have this issue with every new defensive staff. You're always going to have with a new defensive staff, who fits in and where. And I think just with more new players that maybe adds a little additional element of complexity with that. There's a couple things that I'm really, really high on though. The secondary appears to be really, really deep. And as I mentioned, the position coaching is just going to be light years ahead of where it was, the last few seasons. So I think to answer your question, I think they'll be kind of like the interplay between the running game and the passing game. I think that they will be just about okay, middle of the pack to really be a nightmare in terms of keeping a lot of games from being just out and out shootouts. Just enough stops to really just give USC a lot of big leads throughout the season.
Yeah, and that's I think the most important thing, right? I mean, there aren't a ton of amazing offenses in the Pac-12. The only ones that are probably going to be any good come to mind probably Oregon, Washington State, maybe Oregon State. I think a couple of them are going to be kind of duds, if you, to be honest. Utah, obviously, but I think they're going to stack up pretty well against a lot of those teams. So, all right, let's let's look at the kind of last component of the series. And also, actually, one more quick point before we move on to that. I actually really do love the hiring of Michigan's defensive coordinator for USC. I think it's kind of weird that Harbaugh tried because there was rumors of Harbaugh leaving to go coach Minnesota, and then that never happened. But it's kind of funny they lost a bunch of coordinators and stuff, and that really does not bode well for me for this season. I'm going to be kind of low on Michigan this season, and we're gonna have to see where that goes. But no, I'm pretty excited to see. I want to see if Michigan. I kind of suspect that Harbaugh kind of got lucky last year, and they caught a kind of down year in the conference. They got a good, they got a good schedule last year. They have a really good schedule again this year too. Maybe they just got lucky against Ohio State, and then they were able to win the Big Ten because they just got Iowa, which was a free win apparently. So they were able to do that to win the conference championship, and then they just got blown out by Georgia. So it's interesting, and I want to see how Michigan sorts out. And it might be a path where Michigan kind of comes down this year, and USC taking their defensive coordinator comes up. Because Michigan's never really had a bad defense; it's just their offense has usually been the thing that's not been able to
Yep.
pull through for them in games. So, all right, let's look at the schedule here. So you've sent me kind of here a list of the you sent me a list of the games and where you would make the spread itself. So obviously, the first game is September 3rd versus Rice. Where do you have that line?
Yeah, I'm not going to second guess the market. I think 35 is fair.
Okay.
Rice is totally starting over. I'm glad that they're giving Bloomgren a lot of time. They actually made some incremental improvements. They just COVID really crushed them. They were actually supposed to start the season in 2020, like literally kick off the entire season, and they didn't play their first game until I think like late October. So it's just, and that was supposed to be like kind of like their first surge of the first window. So starting over, 35 points, hang in there, Mike Bloomgren, better days ahead. So
Yeah. It's a that spread is too big. I don't think I could bet that spread, to be honest. And I think that's
wow,
more than fair. It's so big though, right? Because at a certain point, you're just like, what's the point? Like, let's just start our
yeah,
backup, right?
yeah,
There's no point in like once you're up 28 points,
yep,
what's the 35th point, right? Like, well, actually,
yeah.
maybe I guess if you just keep, I don't know. I think at a certain point, you just kind of say, okay, let's put in our backups. 9-10. So September 10th at Stanford. Where do you have this line? This is not a
Uh,
public line yet, I don't think.
No, this is just, and this is what I would put the line. This is what I think the line is going to be, and just how I just kind of a quick note on how I'm getting these lines. Obviously a closing line is the result of a bunch of buyers and sellers going through price discovery and getting to what seems to be a fair price. I'm not both a buyer and seller. I don't have other buyers or sellers on the other end of the line. So basically what I'm doing is I'm saying if I was going to bet Stanford, what would I need to bet Stanford? If I was going to bet USC, what would I need? Basically take the average between the two and understand where I'm probably shading and maybe just change it a little bit from the average. So, I got USC minus 13. Don't know if I'd give 2 touchdowns, but I think that's about a fair price. Kind of hard to go any higher considering how Stanford just mashed USC at the Coliseum last season so bad that they fired their coach after the second game of the season.
Yeah. I That minus 13 line, that makes a lot of sense to me, and I would probably take USC there in a kind of revenge spot. That seems about right for me. Um, Stanford is another team that I don't think is going to be doing particularly amazingly well this season, so I think that might be a good opportunity to fade them. Um, Fresno State. Uh, where do you have? So they're at home to Fresno State. Where do you have this line?
Yeah, I've got this low at just -8. We talked last time about the Mountain West and how I liked Fresno State to win the Western Division of that. They return a lot. Jake Hayner is a proven commodity, not just at the G5 level, but he beat a UCLA team that was coming off a big win over LSU and that actually finished with I think 8 wins. Tedford comes back, so that's a tough spot, and I can tell you that as soon as that game was inked, they've been looking forward to that at Fresno State. I was at that famous Reggie Bush like 500 yards and 7 touchdown game against Fresno State in 2005, and there was a lot of Fresno State fan presence there, not just in numbers but in voice too. And that is going to be a tricky game, and that is a physical team as well. So well coached, continuity, even though they have a new coach, because Tedford basically knows, probably recruited half of those guys, and there's not a big transition in that he handed off successfully to DeBoer when Tedford left the first time. Very very tricky game for USC. So giving 8 is about all I could give.
That screams to me like USC minus 13 and a half. Like I'd take Fresno State plus 8, but like there's no way that line is like there's no way that line is around a touchdown. Like that line is at
Yep.
least 10. And that's
Yep.
going to be that's like again, this is lines you can look at and you can start being like, okay, where is the value here? And I think that could definitely be a value spot. Next up, they visit Oregon State. Now your line here is actually really surprising to me. Why do you have this line? Where do you have this line and what do you have it at?
Yeah, I've got USC just giving 2. Realistically, I couldn't take either team without getting points. There's going to be a big variance where you're just not going to take either team that's appetizing enough to really buy in. It's a road game. Those early road games can be tough. Oregon State just mashed them last season. It wasn't even competitive after about the first quarter. Oregon State is much better at quarterback now than they were at that spot last season. Um, I think that playing at Corvallis at that spot is much much trickier than the 2 weeks earlier playing at Palo Alto, where everybody's just kind of having wine and cheese, and there's a football game that happens to be played. It's tricky. It's tough. That's a good team. Jonathan Smith is a very, very, very good coach. USC should be happy just to grab a win. I think this is where people start to complain a little bit after whatever happened against Fresno State and then Oregon State. These two games could see like kind of like the first end of the honeymoon, I guess, as it relates to the Lincoln Riley tenure.
Yeah. This game screams to me again, same kind of thing. Like there's no way this game is under a touchdown. No, literally 0% chance.
Really?
There is no. I would probably take Oregon State, but there's no like I cannot like because here's the thing, right? And this is an argument I have a lot in terms of this is something I talk about a lot in terms of call when we talk about the NFL and Call of Duty, because there's certain teams that betters will bet on, and USC is definitely one of those teams. So you're always in Call of Duty. There's a bunch of teams that people always bet on, and you know who those teams are. And then
Hmm.
if you set the fair price, like you never get a good price on that team's like. But if you're betting that team, you have to know that that team's going to win, right? And this is the thing, and like there's certain like the perfect example of this is last year for the NFC divisional round. It was or no wild card round. Sorry, it was 49ers versus the Dallas Cowboys. And to be honest, in a lot of cases, at least in terms of the betting angle, Dallas is somewhat synonymous with USC in terms of kind of this elite program that sometimes doesn't do well, but usually is very thought of as a really strong team. I had the 49ers as a favorite. 100% all the way. I thought I had the 49ers winning the game. 49ers are getting 3.5 points. So I was all over spread and money line in that game. And the thing of it was, I realized after that game, obviously the 49ers won that game, but I realized after that even if the sports books were sitting there with a model similar to mine and had the 49ers winning that game outright, they could not have Dallas at plus money. Because if you put Dallas as plus money,
Hmm.
everybody's going to bet Dallas. If you're giving
Yeah.
people plus 150 on Dallas,
Yeah.
you're going to have a match. And like Dallas, like it's not like Dallas had no chance to win the game. They had a chance to win the game. It was more likely San Francisco was going to win the game, but if there is a chance the Dallas could still win the game, so you have to protect yourself from that chance and give people a bad line. So this is a perfect, like, yeah, Oregon State -2 or Oregon State +2 might be the fair line, but there's no way that's less than 10. That's probably almost like
Wow.
three scores, I'd say. Like honestly, like it's probably going to be like 14, 15, something like that points. Like there's no way you're going to get anything less than 10 in that game.
All right. Well, how
Same
about
as
this?
Fresno.
How about this scenario? This could be like USC giving 8, and everybody's like, "What stinks here? Somebody knows something."
Yeah, no,
Right?
exactly right, and you can tell that because like there's some lines where you're like, there is something like I've noticed that a couple times. Like one was last year, it was week 2 for the NFL, and it was like Chiefs versus the Ravens. I think the Ravens had lost the first week against someone bad, and then they had the Chiefs week 2, and the Chiefs had just crushed someone. And the line was like Ravens +4.5, and people were like, how is this isn't a touchdown? I'm like, yeah, yeah, okay. Ravens are going to win this game, aren't they? And sure enough, they won the
Yeah.
game, right? So you can find spots like that, and that's exactly like right last year, Stanford versus Oregon, right? Like the books know they have things that they have ways that they know when these teams are going to fall in, and that's an example of it.
Yeah,
All
and
right,
I've just real quick. I've got a. We're going to discuss this in more detail in the next pod when we're going over my trip to Vegas and comparing the books and just those opportunities. I've got a good 30 minutes on, or 30 seconds on kind of that phenomenon that you're talking about. So, anyways,
mhm,
stay tuned. Listen to
for
the next
sure.
pod, everybody.
Yep. All right, so to start October, their fifth game of the season against Arizona State. Now, there's a lot of question marks for this game. For this game is who's going to be coaching Arizona State at this point.
Hmm.
But where do you put the line, assuming this program is still intact?
Yeah, I'm saying USC is going to be giving 18. Well, that's what I would have it. I'm sure that you're thinking it'll be a lot higher. I think that, to your point, like we just talked about in the Pac-12 pod, this team has had Arizona State has had just massive turnover on the roster and the coaching staff. Trading Jane Daniels for Emory Jones is not really an upgrade in my opinion, especially when you consider that they have a downgraded offensive coordinator too. This could get out of control pretty quick, but again, I think that probably the USC defense is going to keep this from being just an absolute runaway.
Yeah. So, all right, I kind of agree that the line when we get to that game, that line might be a little bigger, but that 18 is a line that because again they could have lost either Fresno or potentially Oregon State, so that line could be about 18. I'd probably take Arizona State in there. Next up is Washington State. Now this is a team we're both kind of high on this year. Where do you put this line?
So I've got it USC giving 12 and a half. I made a pretty good case for Washington State to be somewhere between a sneaky strike the soft target team versus also they could be just a wild card team. Um, we just don't know. They could, they've got that new offensive coordinator and quarterback and the defensive coordinator from Nevada, which I like. So I think that this might not be as easy as a lot of people are um are expecting. I've got it minus 12 and a half. I'm thinking that's probably a win expectancy about like 65% or so. Um, so I've had USC favored in every game, just as we're halfway through here. I've had them favored in all 6 games, but when I just kind of run it through the model and see all the probabilities, it's right now forecasting that they'd be 4-2.
Yeah, I mean, so I would in this case I'd take Washington State at that point. I think you're getting a touchdown in a bit, I'd probably take Washington State. I think that team could be pretty good.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's a game that's gonna be interesting. That's an early October game. So really really excited for that game. All right, next up, what could be the battle for the Pac-12 South at
Well,
Utah?
there's no South, there's no divisions now.
Oh, there isn't?
Yeah, it's just the top 2 teams.
Oh, I forgot about that. Okay. Well, huh. Well, I don't know. All right. Well, it could be a very important battle nonetheless.
Oh, it absolutely
Yeah,
will
for
be,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah, at Utah. So who do you have as favorites in this game? Now, I think if these two teams have about an equal record, so if USC is not if they didn't lose to Fresno, Oregon, and like if USC's undefeated, they're clearly favorites in this game. Probably by like I think they're probably laying 7.5. Um, that if they're undefeated, right? Because there's going to be insane juice on this team if they're undefeated. Um, but assuming kind of a neutral thing, maybe they lose a game to Oregon State or Washington State or even Fresno State in there. Where do you put the line in here?
I would have it Utah giving 8.5. Um, Utah is just, and actually that might be, it's interesting. Utah's a very bad matchup for USC because, the place I'd phrase it this way. The place that they are going to be least improved from last year is the defensive line, and especially the physicality on the defensive line. And Utah is going to pick up where they left off in terms of just punching people in the face and running it down your throat. Plus, they have a really good quarterback now. Um, not to hit replay again, but when Utah played USC at the Coliseum, it was ugly. It was just complete physical dominance, and it's hard to see flipping that script in 12 months. Um, just a horrible matchup for them. I think Utah can make it a very long night. I think that USC's offense could be good enough to stay with them for a while, but I think at the end the defense just gets worn down.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair assessment. Um, yeah. All right. Next up at Arizona, they'll definitely be pretty large favorites in this game. Where do you put the line here?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a little trickier than most people do. I would make it Arizona or getting 15. Um, any more than that, like I talked about in the Pac-12 pod, these guys believe um, in Jed Fish, and they're upgrading their quarterback. They're going to have a lot more talent at wide receiver with Cowing from UTEP, my beloved Miners, and the new guy, the freshman from he's from where is he? Some he's right around me in Orange County. Anyways, he was like a top 50 guy. He had no interest in coming to USC, and he decommitted from Oregon to go to Arizona. So there's pieces there on offense. The defense, I think, is going to stink and maybe be even worse because they have a downgrade in defensive coordinator. But this game's a little more fraught. Wouldn't I I wouldn't give more than 15. That's what I would make the line um, for USC at Tucson.
Yeah, that's it. It's a sneakily smaller line. That line will probably be larger. I'd probably take the minus 15, but if that starts getting over 21.5, that's a little maybe iffy. Next up, Cal. This is another in-state rival. I guess they're rivals. I guess I don't know. You probably know more about that than me. Where do you put this line?
So this is the game that I mentioned where I think Matt Campbell kind of just reincarnates himself in real time. Um, kind of goes through some space-time continuum and simultaneously lives two lives, and he comes back as Justin Wilcox. There's just a lot there. Now, Cal is not as dynamic as Iowa State was on offense, but there's just that very sound defense, smart vibe. Don't beat yourself. Don't give up stupid plays on defense. I could really, really, really easily see Wilcox frustrating the heck out of Riley, just like Campbell tended to do every year. Um, I would make it USC minus 12 and a half. That might be not as commensurate with that big buildup, but I think that Cal's offense is so limited that eventually two touchdowns seems about right, but I think it'll be a slog to get there.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that screams to me like T's under a touchdown. But yeah, that's a little high for me. But Cal is again another team that like sneakily they will do good things. Sneakily they will beat a good team, and you have to watch out for that. They just didn't last year, which made me really sad. But usually they're able to beat good teams, and that's the thing. Next up, Colorado. Um, Not fun. Where do you put this? I think this is your biggest spread. Where do you have this?
Yeah, well, aside from Rice, so
Oh
congratulations,
yeah.
Colorado, and having some great company there. I would make it minus 31. I think it's just not only is Colorado just going to be horrible this season, but what a terrible spot for them to be in because I think they're gonna, USC's gonna be coming off something of a slog slash rock fight against Cal, and it's Friday night at the Coliseum, so it's a short week for the Buffs. Um, I could see USC really just wanting to kind of just expunge the bad taste from the prior week and just wanting to score like 70 if they can. And I don't think Colorado. This is the kind of game where USC's defense would look the best all season, to be honest with you. Um, so I make it 31 just because we're in that same area about where Rice is.
Yeah, and that could be bad. The interesting question will be who do they beat by more, USC or Colorado, and will that be their biggest win differential of the season? Interesting question.
Yeah, I could actually see it being Colorado because you've got your first game, whatever, versus at that time, I think, especially in that spot, considering it's by far the weakest team they're playing in November, it could be just like the kind of show off moment and maybe the peak of the season.
Well, the interesting thing to that is that the next week they have I guess their number one rival. Well, no, I guess the second rival. I don't know. I don't know exactly who USC's rivals. I know a couple of them. I don't know the order of the rivals. Next up is USC, the team they brought with them to the to the Big Ten, or supposedly have. UCLA. So they're against UCLA. So the question, or that UCLA, which is very close by. Um, the question is like the argument will be for Colorado game when it's like 31, be like, oh, is it a trap game or like a look ahead spot? What do you think about this? Where do you have this line?
Yeah, I've got USC giving 6.5. I can't see it being a touchdown. I actually, for a while, was thinking, should UCLA be favored? But and when we talked about UCLA in the Pac-12 pod, you know, interestingly, USC has kind of just already gone to what UCL is, which is, a lot of supposedly a dynamic offense. They definitely were a dynamic offense last season, rebuilding on defense. Um, but like I've outlined, USC has brought in parts from, higher level programs than UCLA has, and they have more of a known quantity at defensive coordinator. So I think just all around they're just a better team. I think that UCLA's offense is enough to definitely make this a one-score game. So I couldn't really bring it up to UCLA giving USC giving more than 6.5.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting take. Um, all right, and then last but not least, I guess. So Notre Dame is, I guess, your biggest rival, then I guess, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So, and that's also a friend of the show, Dylan. That's his podcast, Four Horsemen. They have that's his favorite team. So again, this will be a fun game. This will be at the Coliseum. This is Thanksgiving weekend. I'm not sure which day it is on Thanksgiving weekend. Is it
It's on
Sunday?
Saturday.
Saturday,
Saturday.
Saturday night. Yeah, yeah, okay. So it's Saturday. Is it? Well, actually, we have no idea if it's Saturday night or not. But it usually is Saturday night, I think, or Saturday afternoon at least. I think
It's usually at 12:30 or 5 o'clock Pacific. It's in one of those windows.
12:30 or 5 o'clock Pacific.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So that would be either our afternoon or our late game,
Or your primetime game. Yeah.
primetime
It
game.
just
Yeah.
depends on just how much prestige there appears that it'll be.
See, that's the thing, right? Because last year I had forgotten this game even happened, which I think is more than fair to USC. I think,
Yeah, you're
but
very fortunate.
yeah, but I think if it's a good USC and a good Notre Dame, yeah, that's going to prime time. Again, like there are so many good matchups on Thanksgiving weekend. It's one of the best weekends of college football. And again, like we're only like 2 years away from Texas A&M back again. That's
Yeah.
gonna yeah. So because like that's gonna happen. We know that's gonna happen. So like we're gonna have some really good, like you're gonna have like Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, Auburn, Texas, Texas A&M, and then um, I'd assume USC, ND, Notre Dame on. Man, it's just a great. And you maybe if Florida State can put it together at some point, they could maybe give Florida a run for their money too. So here's some amazing games. But yeah, okay. So where do you put this line? I kind of I disagree with you on this line. Where do you have this?
Wow. I'm curious which way you have it going. I have Notre Dame giving 12.
That's way too
Um,
high.
what's that?
I think that's way too high.
Really?
Yeah, this is like
Everything everything I said about the Utah game is basically this on steroids, except Notre Dame's quarterback is less proven. Except he's a much better runner, which just traditionally has given USC fits. Um, uh, and I don't even think Notre Dame is just is a top 5 team. I think they're more like a top 10 team, but just a horrible matchup. I could see them just making this, just maybe Notre Dame punting just one time the whole game.
yeah. Um, Maybe. I don't know. I this to me, and again, it depends on where we're sitting here, right? If we're sitting at like 1-2 loss Notre Dame, 1-2 loss USC, this game is very important for potential New Year's Six bowls, which whether those mean anything ever again or not, I don't know. But like this screams to me like last second field goal game. I think like if you're giving me USC
Really?
plus 12, I take that 100%. I take that last second field goal game 100%. I don't think it'll get to 12. I think for this to be a 12, you need to have like USC would have to probably be a 3-loss USC against like a 1-loss Notre Dame, and their one
Yeah.
loss would have had to been Ohio State. But like that's the way that's how you get this. I don't think you're gonna have this. There's no way this is a double-digit spread game. This screams to me rivalry game within like a last-second field goal or touchdown or something. So, but we'll have to see. We are very far away from that, but uh, just hoping that it's gonna be a very good game, right? And to be fair, at this point we have all the ingredients for that to be a good game, right? So
Yeah, absolutely.
actually, I wonder,
Yeah,
do we have that line? Because we had some early look ahead lines before.
yeah, we did.
Let me find that. Let me see. But all right, so let's see. What are your thoughts? So which game do you think is the hardest? Oh, we do actually. Okay, so that last game, it's USC minus 2.5.
Okay. Um,
Wow,
yeah,
that's closer to what
I
I'd
would.
put it at. I didn't even see that
Mm,
before, but yeah, that seems about right. So, but yeah, so that game could be very good too. But yeah, I think
yeah, I'd grab all the Notre Dame you could if you were so inclined.
that's
Um,
probably fair. That's probably fair, to be fair. That's probably a good idea. But no, all right. So where do you put? So you think that the hardest game of the season is between Utah and Notre Dame? Which one do you think is the hardest one for them?
yeah, I would say Utah, even though I've got it at a smaller line, just because it's on the road and that's a crazy place to play, and those are some really really good fans at Rice Eccles. Um, I think USC will be more fully formed, obviously, at the end of the season than that tough road game in the middle of the season at Utah.
Mhm. Okay, and then what's the game that you think is the most likely to be the Lincoln Riley USC trip up game? You think it's Cal? So okay, if
Yeah,
those are the two, so
yeah,
I'll kind of rephrase it a
yeah,
little bit better.
yeah,
If you think Utah and Notre Dame are the two losses, what's the third
yeah,
loss then?
yeah. Cal or Oregon State. I have Oregon State at a lower number. That's going to be really interesting just to see like how much of the DNA of the program he can just flip right away. And just avoid that stupid early season road conference game. I think they're a better team. They're better on offense. They're not as good on defense as Cal. I think Cal's more of Cal's more like there's more likelihood that Cal will be a scare than Oregon State wins, if that makes sense. Yeah, I'd say Oregon State. Oregon State. The other thing is there's more variance on that game at Oregon State. Maybe is where I'm going with this. I don't think Cal has enough to beat USC, whereas Oregon State does. But I think Cal can make it a rock fight, turn it into Iowa, Wisconsin, or something like that.
I like how we've just talked about this and we're all like, no, 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 they're gonna beat UCLA. Like we're all like, no, no, no. That's like the thing is like to be fair, outside of the two losses you have and the Oregon State -2, the UCLA is the next closest one. We're all like, no, no, no. That's fine. They'll beat USC. That's fine. UCLA and like because it's so like that'd be such a Chip Kelly thing to do to just be like, yeah, we're just gonna get blown up by USC. But yeah, all right. So I mean, I'm really excited for this team, and the cool thing about USC is when they're good, they're going to get a lot. They're going to get show up a lot on Pac-12 After Dark probably. So we'll see them. We might see them a couple times in Pac-12 After Dark, and definitely some later games too. So, like that USC Oregon State game to me that just screams like 10:30 start. That's what that screams to me. That screams to me like
Yep.
that's some TV execs already got that earmarked for a 10:30 start. And yeah, a couple of these ones too, maybe USC Cal or something like that. So all right, so well that wraps it up for a USC specific podcast. We're gonna get this out to you now, and you're probably gonna when you see this, you're probably gonna see these both in the same feed at the same time. We're gonna have the USC podcast, and also we are gonna record our week 1 predictions and kind of the bets we're making here before the season
Week
starts.
0.
Week 0, sorry, yes, it is week 0 for college football. Yeah, so we're gonna record that, and you'll see them both about the same time. So yeah, stick around. We've got college football. We're recording this on Wednesday night, and we are just hours away. Well, not hours. I guess there's the D2, but that doesn't really count. We are only days away from Nebraska at Northwestern. So see you guys. We'll see you in the next podcast.